Your brand is defined by what your customers say about you when you're not in the room.
Joining me now is Matt Kaness.
Matthew Kaness.
Here with Matt from Goodwill Finds.
I've heard you described as the best kept secret in American retail.
I don't know that being the best kept secret is a compliment. Younger consumers have time and no money, and older consumers have money and no time. Urban and Anthropologie North American stores business is a machine. Goodwill was nowhere, but we accomplished so much in that period of time. We generated 2 billion unique visitors to our site with no marketing budget. Company, role, location, pick two, you don't get three. What I quickly gleaned at Burton was the energy that the founder brings is something that is hard to quantify, the impact, but it's everywhere. So there's something really incredible about the grit, the perseverance, the dedication, and it's usually to this bigger purpose. What are we doing here? Why does this brand exist? So when you're the operator, you're the CEO, you're the president, you better know what's your mandate. If you don't deliver the numbers, they'll find somebody else.
Matt, so good to see you. Thank you so much for having us here in your beautiful home. I've heard you described as the best kept secret in American retail. And I can absolutely relate to that description. I've also heard you described as a polymath. That kind of personality doesn't come out of nowhere. So I want to jump back just initially. Who was Matt Kaness in high school?
Well, first, welcome.
Thank you.
So great to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
And and thanks for the kind words and the flattery.
It's all true.
I took a long time to learn how to say thank you when someone compliments you.
Yeah,
so
indeed,
thank you.
Indeed.
Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
But I don't know that being the best kept secret is a compliment.
Well, I guess it's a double-edged sword, that one.
But you asked about high school, growing up. I was a math and science kid. I was very studious. I wasn't one of the cool kids. I wasn't popular. I wasn't an athlete. I was a Mensa kid. So just solving puzzles and taking things apart and doing well in school was the goal. And I also had a bunch of medical issues as a kid. So which we talked about a little bit. Reflecting back, that had a big impact on my life in having to navigate that. And so, maybe didn't experience as much joy in my childhood as either was typical or, would have been nice to have experienced. So I share that because for me, at this stage of my life, I put a big premium on trying to experience joy. And I do that primarily through my family and close friends. The curiosity piece has allowed me to navigate relationships, conversations, and see the world as a way to keep learning. And I had some incredible role models professionally along the way that kind of illustrated what that looked like. But I just love learning from people. And I think one of the greatest cheat codes in life that I wish people took as much advantage of as I try to is whenever you get a chance to meet somebody is to see what you can learn from them. And giving yourself permission to not know. Having an engineering training, in undergrad, and learning the scientific method, you realize that there's a lot of humility that you have to have as a scientist. And, the practice of science is an admission of ignorance because you're constantly running experiments to know how the world works, to learn new things. And so I think that also has kind of been inherent in how I've approached things since.
I love that. I think the engineering background is something that I'd just love to step into for a second. So I'm conscious of just how creative you become in later endeavors. So I guess I'm trying to find that point where you found the balance between the rigor and discipline of the scientific method and the more intuitive elements of the creative process?
Well, you skipped a piece that I'll connect the dots on. After my engineering undergrad, I realized that I would be a terrible professional engineer. And typically what you do is you sit for the PE exam, or you go back for a master's at some point. And there was just something lacking in the experience, the professional edification of applying that, in industry, that led me to keep seeking. And so from there, I went to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and was a patent examiner for 5 years. And that was really my first exposure to innovation and invention, working with inventors, small business owners, entrepreneurs, startups that needed IP patents to protect their inventions and to give them, build a moat around their ideas. And I thought I wanted to go to law school. And so I did that for a number of years. But again, found that there was something lacking. And I was this close to going to law school at night when a high school friend was like, "Why are you doing that? You should go get an MBA." And I was like, "What's MBA? I'm 5'10". I can't go to the NBA." And I never heard the acronym before. And so I started doing some research and decided that was a better path, that I'd be more curious and interested about the business side of innovation versus the legal side. And so that was another kind of right turn. And then, post grad school, did a couple years in consulting to kind of keep the learning going and find a lane. I like to say with folks, you got to kind of find your lane and then commit. And in hindsight, kind of going back to the engineering physics analog, I gave myself permission to be honest with myself and the world as to what it was that I was doing that I liked and what was lacking. And after kind of hitting a wall and saying, okay, this is not for me, and I like to think about the magnetism of a magnet with positive and negative polarities, and the intensity of the force that it emits can move you slower or faster in either being attracted to things or repulsed from things. That kind of like letting my inner compass, my inner magnetism kind of come to the forefront and evolve and develop allowed me to say, okay, what is it I like about engineering? But what's lacking? We go find that in something else. And between then and now, I've been fortunate to keep compounding, to keep adding, to keep saying, okay, there's things that I've done that I'm going to bring to this situation, but there's things that I'm lacking that I want to start as a newbie, and learn and add and kind of round out. And you do that by finding the people who already know, the best people. And so that also kind of became a second filter for me, was who are the best people at what it is that I'm curious about, and how do I get in their orbit? And again, a lot of you make your own luck somewhat in life, but there is a lot of the universe cooperating. And I've had the incredible opportunity to learn from many incredible founders, entrepreneurs, operators along the way. And then I kind of take from each of them, but mostly was giving myself permission to kind of, let Matt come out, and to ultimately get to a point where it was all intuitive, and it was just like, okay, I'm being Matt at work. And I think ultimately that's everyone's goal.
Everyone's dream.
Is to just be in a situation where you're yourself. You're not thinking about your perception or your persona or your reputation. You're being you.
Yeah, you're showing up.
And so that was, I think, in hindsight, gratuitous that I had those opportunities, but I also was willing to pivot and to, look for something different that would fill that lacking. And then the management consultant piece, where you get a chance to work at a lot of clients in a short period of time, is what led me to my current career, because of the project that we did at Burton Snowboards. and so that was an incredible stroke of luck for me, and super grateful to the partners that assigned me to that project. And so when I got there, what was really interesting was the business was growing 50% year over year. This was when snowboarding was kind of crossing over into the mass audience. This is pre-Olympics, pre-X Games. So like Burton's U.S. Open was the pinnacle event, and X and the Rumors Around the Olympics was just happening, and Shaun White's in the building as a high schooler, and so this is like, and I had no understanding of this when I got there, right? So I kind of fell backwards into this moment. But what was interesting to me was they were making less money, growing that fast, and that was the project that we got hired to solve. So you have your toolkit, you go in, you interview folks, you get a bunch of data, you're sitting literally in a conference room till 2 a.m, just like crunching numbers as a team. And within a couple of weeks, we're like, well, here's the challenge. All your growth is in soft lines, and your legacy supply chains are on hard lines, right? So that was the basis for all the numbers that said, here's why you're making less money. And we're presenting this to, like, my partner had flown in 5 minutes before the meeting, like they do. And we're sitting on, couches in Jake's office with dogs and
The founder.
Yeah. And doing the readout. And Jake says, okay, and looks at me because I was the face of the project at that point, and says, because we made him a big proposal, Matt, can you make this happen for me? As a founder would, right? Because it's his money, right? And I, of course, say, yes, Jake, I can. And he goes, okay. And that was it. Meeting over. And we wound up selling them, year and a half long project that I was the point on. And afterward, my partner admonished me because he's like, we don't do anything as consultants. Like, our job isn't to make it happen.
We don't execute.
Like, our job is to design and instruct and coach and help them do it. And I'm being a little tongue in cheek, right?
Sure.
But that was the moment where I'm like, I found my lane, and I'm not that. So as soon as this project's over, it's probably time for me to kind of get back at it, which is what happened. But my time there was, I think, my moment to kind of learn how do you put together all of these very quant, operational, linear thinking tools to a very creative, demand, market-driven, founder-led culture where like the secret sauce is in the building. And for me, that just felt intuitive. It was kind of like, I totally get what they're doing. I understand why it works. I would like to be a part of this. And so we were really successful with that project. And then when the project ended, that's when I was like, okay, let me find the closest thing to this within a commutable radius of my home, where my wife and I had 3 in diapers at the time. And so moving was not, kind of in the cards in that moment. And that's when I found Burton Urban Outfitters, because Burton sold backpacks to Urban. And so through that connection and through a job post that I found, I was able to get an interview at Urban. And then that was kind of like the stepping stone to next.
And you jumped straight into a C-suite role there as Chief Strategy Officer.
I started as strategic planning manager.
Okay.
Because I think that was the role that somebody who they just let go had the title. And it was easy to just delete and put my name in the rec that already existed. Again, tongue in cheek. But I shared this with you before. I've learned this framework over time because I've had the opportunity to move around and a lot of the companies I was like, I'm going to be here for a decade, and then 2 years later, event, right? And we can talk about that a little bit. But I've had enough transition points where I developed this framework that I share with younger folks when they ask for advice. Company, role, location, pick two, you don't get three. And where you're at in your life, kind of dictates the order. You can optimize for one. There's degrees for the second, and the third one you get what you get. So in that moment where I'm going from Burton to Urban, I'm not moving 3 in diapers. So we're optimizing for geography. And second was, I want to do something like I did at Burton. So company really mattered. Like I was like, I got to find something like this. So I had to be open to whatever role they were willing to hire me. So I was like, yeah, like whatever you guys need me to do, I want to be here. And so that was 2007.
You had experienced the dynamic between a founder-led organization that had transitioned to hiring a professional CEO at Burton. That was also true at Urban Outfitters. Urban Outfitters is well known for a highly decentralized structure, and they believe very strongly, and others have credited that structure as being a critical element of their success. But you have a role that sits above the functional leads of each brand. So you've got a bunch of different dynamics at play here. If you could just start with unpacking for us a little bit, at least at Urban Outfitters, but I think more broadly, where you've got a founder entrepreneur who sees the world and the opportunity for the organization through one lens, and a CEO who has a different mandate, and how you manage to optimize your role between the two.
So now we go down the rabbit hole of old friends who worked together at Urban,
I know.
telling stories. So
forgive us. Yes.
We'll be careful here.
Yes,
with,
indeed.
with what we share.
Indeed.
Well, first let me say the role at Urban was behind the brands, not above the brands.
Okay.
Right. I mean, it's
Good distinction.
like it's always about the customer, and the brands serve the customer. And my role and the team that I was a part of at corporate, sat behind the brands, helping them do their job and pleasing the customer. So that's how I'd frame it. So at Burton, Laurent Pontdevin was the CEO when I was doing that project there, and he went on to run Tom's and Lululemon. So pretty great operator, great leader. And then Jake and Donna, the founders. Jake was actually on a 12-month sabbatical hiatus, snowboarding with riders around the world when my project first started.
As you do.
As any founder does.
Or should.
Or should.
Yeah.
So he wasn't even in the building when I first got there. But then he got back, and it was kind of like, okay, like what'd I miss? What's going on? Right. So that the energy that the founder brings is something that is it's hard to quantify the impact, but it's everywhere. And that thematically, that's kind of things I've been able to pick up on or see or value, and maybe in a way that others haven't. But in that moment at Burton, I could understand, the distinction between the founder who is the owner, right, is the parent. Like there was something missing in the world that they felt so compelled to create that they sacrificed so much to do it and risk so much, because the odds are so against the founder in creating something that is substantial. And so, and having tried myself a few times and failed, I appreciate how risky it is, the odds of it. So when you get the chance to meet somebody who's actually broken through and made it, the first thing that I think of is, who are the 9,999 other folks in action sports who went after it at the same time you did that isn't standing anymore, right? So like there's something really incredible about the grit, the perseverance, the dedication, that level of commitment. And it's usually to this bigger purpose. So that's the other thing is like what are we doing here? Why does this brand exist? And you see it in the people, right? Because the people that it's it's a risk to join an early stage startup. You're joining because you believe the vision the founder has that you're trying to manifest. But it's a bet. And so, what I quickly gleaned at Burton was Jake was creating a place for the skate park kid who didn't want to ski with, the
Mum and dad.
the kids who played tennis or golf, the country club folks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was like, because the kids who surf and skate, you know, it's a different crowd, right? It's a different edge, and so snowboarding kind of filled that hole in the market for what are we doing in the wintertime, and so he was repping the sport. That was the most important thing. And then you got guys like John Lacey, who's the CEO there now. He was a product manager when I was there. And he was fortunate for me, he was a Philly area guy. So when I got there, he and I hit it off. But he was also kind of like, looking sideways, like, who's this consultant and who's he think he is? But then he quickly realized Matt's here to help me be successful. And so you find allies, you find folks that are already kind of, immersed and are in the brand and have permission, you know, to um, to partner with, to navigate. That was kind of a theme as well. But LP's job was to deliver the numbers, and that's the mandate, right? So when you're the operator, you're the CEO, you're the president, you better know what's your mandate, and and your job is to deliver it, right? And obviously there's constraints and there's boundaries and there's sacred cows occasionally. But if you don't deliver the numbers, they'll find somebody else. And so that was kind of going to urban, maybe the indirect training I had gotten on that model or the benefits that like it actually isn't a trade-off to build a great brand and deliver this future vision and deliver numbers. You just have to be more creative about the solutions. And you had to think in terms of, is what we're trying to do to deliver the numbers brand dilutive, brand accretive, or neutral? And your brand's a bank account that with deposits and withdrawals. And over time, the numbers, yield whether you bankrupted your brand or it compounds to this massive value. And so maybe it's a little bit more complex, maybe it's more nuanced, maybe you have to work harder at finding things that are at worst neutral to the brand. But when I got to urban, that it just became obvious to me that same dynamic was in play. And so having had, some reps in that culture, then it was, maybe I could move a little faster and kind of understanding how to navigate that, but also the benefits that you could derive from it. And, at Urban specifically, by the time I got to Urban, Dick Hayne was already a legend, had already created this, I think billion in revenue, 6 billion market share. I mean, it was just like it was a juggernaut. And Glenn was the creative genius behind Anthropologie.
Yeah.
And had just been rewarded for his, loyalty, dedication, and his delivery at Anthro to be the CEO at Urban Inc. But two different roles, right? One is the parent, the owner, the standard bearer, the visionary for like this has to work in the future. Like we're doing something bigger here that has to be the thing that we keep everybody focused on. And then the other role is you got to deliver the numbers. And in a public setting, it's even, more intense.
When we met, which was I think in 2009, so you've been there for a couple of years, the country was being devastated by the Great Recession. Just take me through, because those days were very fraught, I think, for the industry as a whole. And Urban Outfitters is a rare example of a business that navigated about as well as you possibly could. you were in the room. Could you just take us through a couple of the highs and lows or key lessons from that time?
Yeah, that was, you used the word invigorating. Yeah, I mean, what an incredible time. A couple thoughts. One is, and especially in specialty retail, the setup was really important. When Lehman collapses and the markets sell off and everybody is panicking, Urban had a pristine balance sheet. They hadn't overstored. They haven't overexpanded their brand distribution-wise. They hadn't taken on debt, right? So, the firm, the board, Dick Glenn, the management team deserves a lot of credit that they preserved optionality, right? So that's, I think, one big takeaway is when those black swan events happen, where your version of the future has to happen for it to work. That scenario planning has to happen. You don't have any plays to make. So we did because of everything that occurred before that.
Yes.
Right. The second thing I'll say is, looking back, my role was ostensibly the head of growth. That's not what we called it. Nobody in retail, I think, had a title like that. Right. I'm kind of retrofitting my experience in consumer technology back into the retail space, right? Which is a more common role there. Yes. In that industry. But my mandate when I joined the company was our Urban and Anthropologie North American stores business is a machine. We don't need any help with that. We need help growing everything else, right? So that was, again, kind of having clarity in the operating seat. Now, I know I was the most junior person on the executive team, but the mindset was, as the operator working for, in part the CEO, was what's the mandate? Like, what do we have to do? And my contribution was, at the time, 95% of revenue was Urban and Anthropologie North American stores, and probably 98% of the operating profits, right? And the firm's about $1 billion, maybe a little bit more in total consolidated revenues. E-commerce penetration was about 10% across all the brands and countries. So in my mind, it was like, okay, I have to get that 5% of revenue and that 2% of op profit that isn't the machine going. So every day, that was all I was obsessed with. Like, that's the part that I'm going to focus on. And then the penetration, one of the pillars of that strategy, growth strategy, was e-commerce. And so measuring our impact, like, are we growing fast enough, both relative to the rest of the business, but also to the market? How fast is the penetration growing? So just to kind of put book handles on my time there, 7.5, 8 years. When I joined, it was about $1 billion in revenue. When I left, it was 3.5. Non-Urban Anthropologie North American store revenue had gotten to like 35% from the 5%. And e-commerce penetration had gotten from, I believe, that 10% to approaching 40, right? So like, and this is hundreds of people, right? I'm just kind of like capturing that was the outcome of all this energy and how I viewed my role in that. I did have a foot in the future and a foot in the present, as you mentioned. So, Dick, board chair, founder, living in the future. In that moment that you're referencing, it must have been what JP Morgan experienced during, the time of the robber barons and the big banks, and 100 years ago in America, because I saw Dick see everything go on sale. I can get leases cheaper. I can acquire technology cheaper. I can acquire talent cheaper. At the same time, the finance team, which was incredible at Urban, it still is, they're running all these scenarios about like what happens if our comps go minus 50, minus 50. I mean, like they are doing the doomsday scenario planning. So it was very disciplined, very data driven. And if it wasn't for the founder having a vision for the future and believing that half the industry was going to be online at some point in the future, and that we had this incredible once in a lifetime moment to go get everything cheaper than it was, nothing else would have happened. So it had nothing to do with strategy, right? It had to do with vision, conviction, and having the founder still be in charge. Now, all that had to translate because we're still a public company with quarterly earnings, and Glenn still has running a massive organization with, monthly numbers that he has to hit. And so my job was how do we do both? And so that's a framework that I've used now going into new situations since I left Urban, is like really deconstructing a business into, okay, what parts do we need to grow faster and make investments? What part is underperforming that we need to drive more margin, more productivity? And what are the parts that we need to harvest or get rid of, that we need to get out of those businesses? And because of the central organization at Urban, where there were literally dozens of P&L meetings every month, which you experienced, and you experienced it within one brand. I was going to each of those brand, channel, sub-brand market meetings, which was an incredible education for me. But I just saw over and over again, what's important here. How do we build a business? Like what are the line items that we're focused on first? Over and over and over and over again. And I saw that if Urban North America e-commerce is growing really fast and has a massive opportunity, we could invest really fast in that, while another business unit is struggling, and one's not going to slow down the other. So it was just this discipline that you learned there to manage the business bottom up and as close to the customer as possible. And so I think what happened in that moment was we were able to lean into digital and e-commerce and direct-to-consumer growth while the world was on sale, because everybody was retracting, and Dick was living in the future and pulling us all forward, and then that just became the muscle memory. And so we didn't stop until I left in 2015. That we were just expecting ourselves to stay ahead of the industry and grow faster, because we had this incredible conviction from the founder that the industry is going to be half online at some point in the future. So let's get there first.
You believe, as did everyone at Urban, that creativity needs to be an innate part of everyone's role.
Right.
That's what drives innovation, and the
Right.
business is committed to innovation in service of the customer. So everyone's got to be creative. It doesn't
That's right.
matter what role you're in.
That's right.
What is it, do you think, about Urban that sustained that commitment to creativity and innovation?
Well, having the founder still involved helps, obviously, but I don't think that that's necessarily the only prerequisite. So I described Urban to folks as a performance-driven culture. And I think that's probably the heart of answering your question, because I've worked at places, and I also have friends at other places that we trade stories, and I think people give lip service to performance-driven culture, but I don't think folks fully embrace what that actually entails. Netflix probably gets the most notoriety for talking about, we're not a family, we're a high-performing sports team, and you're here to deliver. And then I think towards a duty, and you have to re-enlist, and all their practices of if you wouldn't hire this person again, then you should move them along, and so I'm not like getting into the tactics of it, but just at its heart, my time at Urban was always about the result, and then working backwards to the process of how we got there. And now defining the result with that, kind of going back to the engineering physics piece of like you need both velocity and direction, we define the result based on the customer. So I think that's the other side of that piece, is that it's not just a performance-driven culture, it's a customer-obsessed culture. And, when I think about Dick and other, incredible merchants, incredible founders, operators in the broader retail industry, Jeff Bezos to me is the greatest merchant in American retail history, because it's just about serving the customer. And, his line that if everything has to work on a 3-year strategic planning cycle timeline, you're competing with everybody. But if you give yourself decades, you're not competing with anybody. So then it just comes down to what conviction do you have in your vision of the future? And his old line, I'm pretty sure in the future people aren't going to say, this should be more expensive. I want less assortment. Why is the delivery so fast? Right? And I saw, like, that's kind of how I experienced, how Dick operated the business. Was he had this clear vision for the future, and he made sure that the people in the business shared that obsession with each brand's customer, right? So like we should talk a little bit about how different the brands are, and how important it is to hire the customer, or hire people who are sensitive and empathetic to that customer in the brand. And that's why the decentralized model was so important. But ultimately, the broader company culture was, we're here to please the customer. We measure that in the performance, and then everything else is kind of secondary to that. And so that was kind of like the setup. That was the wireframes of the operating system that was created there over, decades. Then you compound that with the fact that the brands compete on creativity, and it's everybody's job to be creative. So I like to joke with folks that when you have a chief blank officer, you're telling everybody else in the company, your job's not to be blank.
Yeah.
So if you have a chief innovation officer, how does the rest of the organization respond to that? So I'm not innovative. And, and I had a chief strategy officer title, right? I'm not strategic, right? So, I mean, that wasn't, I didn't love the title, but again, like location, company, or role, I didn't really pay much attention to that piece of it. But we didn't talk about strategy. We talked about customer. We talked about the future. We talked about, and we talked about the team we had. We never talked about competition. And the formula that I came up with on strategy was, what can this team do to deliver the future? And so that requires you to get to know the team. Like, you have to intimately know, like, what are they great at? What do they need help with? What motivates them? How do they work together? And so that kind of became the algorithm, for me at least, in translating the future to the present and working to support the brands in delivering today's numbers, but also moving in the direction of, the founder's vision for the future. And like, what an amazing learning laboratory for me, to do that. And I had, no plans to leave. Like, I was like, hometown, greatest company ever, love what I'm doing. But the performance-driven, customer-obsessed, and a acceptance that everyone's job is to be creative. But kind of going back to the strategy piece. So the growth strategy there was, we're going to grow this thing to $10 billion in annual consolidated net revenues. So when I left and we were 3.5, it was a huge failure to our own expectations. And I think that's something that I brought with me, is to really like think big and believe that you can achieve something that's really grand, and to have that expectation of yourself and the team. And it invigorates people. They get excited.
100%.
And one of my shorthands is think about what you're doing and add 2 zeros to it.
2.
And then say, is what I'm doing now sufficient?
Yes.
Right? So if you're, a $10 million business and you add 2 zeros, I mean, do the math, $1 billion in revenue, like, okay, cut it in half. How do we get from, because the mile markers are more like getting from 1 to 2,
Yes.
2 to 10,
Yeah.
10 to 25, 25 to 100, 100 to 250, 250 to over half, half to 1. At least within like consumer retail, I'd say that those are like the mile markers.
They're the brackets, yeah.
And then within each, like the set of milestones that you have to hit change, right? And for me, I always say, like when people are like, Matt, like, what do you want to do next? And I'm like, I want to be grossly underpenetrated to some massive opportunity. So if you're $1 million into a $20 million opportunity, so you're 5% of the way there. If you're $1 billion into a $20 billion opportunity, you're 5% of the way there.
That's a great way to look at it.
Right. So like I think about like how early in the S curve are we in this journey, not what scale are we at. Right. So which has allowed me to kind of operate big corporate, small startup, somewhere in between. So when we had this vision for, Urban Inc. 10 billion in revenue, someone's got to do the math. So I'm like scrolling away in my office late at night, brushing off my Excel skills and building out, these various models. And we said, okay, like here's the core business and let's be really conservative in those projections. And man, the power of compounding is great, which is another lesson in patience and, why you got to give brands time to incubate and evolve and grow. But we came up with 4 pillars for growth for like, adjacent incremental acceleration of the consolidated revenue. And it was, e-commerce and digital. It was new brands.
Organic or acquisition or?
Either or, just like adding new banners. Yeah. It was international. And then it was wholesale, like opening up wholesale for the existing brands, which was an underdeveloped channel at that point. And so I was, my job was kind of wide and deep. It was, be the umbrella for all of it, but then go deep on the e-com digital piece because as a decentralized model, e-com digital was buried within the catalog team under the brand's operating teams, right? So there was no like consolidated centralized infrastructure, which in technology, like it doesn't make sense to not consolidate and leverage. And so, so I went really deep into e-com and digital, and I can talk at length about that and that journey. But then I also had to like figure out international. This Philly kid who had only been to Asia on sourcing trips, like landing in Hong Kong and going up the river to Panyu or taking the train through Shenzhen to Guangdong and
not where you were going to have an Anthro flagship.
And so I remember one time, Glenn asked me to kind of take point on like figuring out Asia, right? And Urban was the kind of place where that was like, that's how you got the direction. Figure out Asia. I remember I went on my first trip. I went with Ted Marlowe, incredible operator who was running the Urban brand at the time, and he and I went over to Japan for a week, and we come back and we report out to Dick, and he's like, "Okay, so what's the Urban brand Japan strategy?" And
After a week,
and I'm the junior person, and all we did was immerse ourselves in youth culture and eat sushi and drink sake and hang out and but like figure out where's the customer, right? So we come back and I'm the junior guy, so Ted shares his point of view and then Dick asks me what I think, and being direct and honest all the time and assuming everybody is smart, well-intended, and self-aware always. So like that's always been the approach. I said, well, I I don't think the Japanese get irony. So I don't know that the urban concept works.
How was that received?
Let's go faster in Europe. So literally off of that trip, and obviously there's more to the conversation and more people got involved in the analysis and the assessment, but it was that like insight that was enough for the founder and Ted to say, we're already in London. We already have a team there. We already have a massive opportunity in front of us there. With that brand, let's go faster where we're already at. And so off of that, like
Rapid pivot.
massive growth, and you look at the European business for urban today, it's huge. So, okay, Matt, you still got to figure out Asia. You failed with the urban brand. So what's next? So Glenn, who was the CEO, but his path was through Anthropologie. So we organized a 3-week trip. Tokyo, Osaka, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, hitting all the high streets, and Glenn's asking me to put this together, and I had never been to, any of those cities except for Tokyo for a week the year before. So I just reach out to everyone I know who has ever been to Asia. And I, maybe 3 weeks of networking and calling everybody and calling every professional service firm that called on urban, and set up this 3-week tour, and which went really well, and got like a real sense of the markets over there, and sat down with the White and Kennedy team in Shanghai to learn about, the youth culture in that section of China, and met with the big trading firms in Tokyo and in Seoul, and learning about, department store culture in those markets. And, so I mean, like met with real estate developers in Hong Kong. So I mean, it's just, again, like this, like massive learning curve, right? For me, we just really enjoyed it. And we figured out that, Anthropologie skews more feminine, than urban. It's an older customer, a little bit more discretionary income. There were some markets where we could kind of like see the customer. Free People, they already have a wholesale division. It's fashion. They already have international buyers from Asia coming to LA to buy the line. So the decision was, let's go really fast with Free People wholesale. So we did a deal with Worldco, the second biggest apparel manufacturer in Japan after fast retailing.
Right. Uniqlo or whatever.
Yeah. And then did a whole bunch of wholesale deals across the rest of Asia. And then Anthropologie was like a huge, internal debate about, the capital investment and all that. And ultimately that didn't happen. So that was international, right? Like I got deep enough to, make some progress, but it was really more me finding the experts and connecting them with the brands and, putting the plans together, versus e-com and digital, where it was kind of like there wasn't anybody, and it was all evolving so fast in the market anyway that I became the expert. So the reason I mentioned that is, this kind of like, you take this top-down strategy of, this is what we believe the future is going to look like, and the things that are going to grow are, the tailwinds in the market are opportunities to find your customer overseas, opportunities to add brands to the portfolio, opportunities to open up new distribution doors, opportunities to participate and grow through this new digital channel that's opening up for all the brands. And then bottom up, it's like, this decentralized model of how the brands operate independent from each other. And then it's, you're pushing on all of it at the same time. And the stuff that deserves to go faster does, and the stuff that doesn't. And the stuff that has to get killed does. And the stuff that requires, much more faster investing or bigger thinking does, right? And so it's this like really complex portfolio of asset and opportunity that you're just constantly putting together. And I think people respond to that, where because there's more. I think there's more agency in it
Internally, you mean?
internally,
Yeah.
where it's like, okay, I see the total company is doing well. I see my friends at the other brands or in the other channels or in the other markets doing well, but I'm not, and I have to solve this, and I have agency to do it, and they've hired me to do this. Versus over here, where it's like things are going well, we're growing really fast. I'm not being tethered by what's happening everywhere else in the company. So I just wanted to like illustrate that structure, I think, is also what enabled the performance, the success that we had.
Yes.
And it required a lot of talent,
Yes.
and it required a certain person who could operate in that kind of environment, where you're not getting top-down instruction, and you're not, they don't want you to ask for permission. Um, so
And you get direction like go figure out Asia.
and certain people respond to that like, man, like what an amazing
Great.
opportunity, and other people will just deer in the headlights. And through that, I kind of pulled out an expression that I like to share with folks when they lament about the retail market. I'm like, there's a growth market somewhere.
I love that line.
There's always a growth market somewhere.
Yes.
You have to go find it, whether it's in your business or you looking for the next opportunity, right? And I experienced that at Urban, where it was like, even when like in the aggregate things were, trailing the market or below plan, in the business, there was something that was cooking on fire, right? And so just go find the growth market.
And I'd love to come back to that. But
So then why did I leave Urban?
that's where I wanted to go to.
Um, I'd gotten to know a lot of people in the startup e-com space because I was wide and deep. And I remember at one point, I remember turning 40 and looking up, and what was me and a couple of people in the brands working on e-com back in 07, 08 was now 400 or 500 people that had been hired and crushing it, and like awesome people. And it was and now like the scale is much like multiples of that today there. But I was like, I'm kind of a figurehead. Like I'm actually not operating. I'm not building. I'm not in the weeds anymore. And at the same time, the founder had taken a liking to me and had said, let's find you a brand to run. And so that was through that pillar of new brands. So we incubated Terrain, and I was part of that team. That was fascinating. We incubated Beholden, and I was part of that team, and that was fascinating. But we spent a ton of time in the market looking to acquire businesses. And I think one of the challenges that Urban has had as a founder-run business that has built everything internal was like organ rejection, the idea of like going outside versus the confidence of like we can do it ourselves, which I agree with. Like in hindsight, like that was always the right call, but it was limiting for me in that creating an opportunity for me to run a brand there through acquisition, was a high hurdle. And so once I was in that mode of like, I'm preparing myself to help close a brand and integrate it, and then I was going to, whether that was Philadelphia or somewhere else in the country, go in and run it. When I was starting to get inbound for opportunities to run brands, that was kind of like, I had to make a decision personally. And so I had a conversation with the founder, hugely supportive of me, pursuing outside opportunities. I felt compelled to do it that way, to not like going behind his back, the family's back, wasn't in my DNA. So I set that path, and then 6 months later, I'm running ModCloth because I had gotten to know some folks that were involved in that business, including the founder.
And ModCloth, renowned for its early adoption of inclusive. In fact, not adoption. They kind of led the way in terms of
pioneer of inclusive fashion.
Pioneer of inclusive fashion. Great description, and also crowdsourcing from a design perspective.
The technology was a social commerce platform as well, so it was kind of coupled this, quirky, modest very feminine fashion brand that was mostly third-party labels when I got there, coupled with this incredible social commerce engine that, before it became kind of off-the-shelf technology, they were actually building it and pioneering it. Because you had two founders, you had a business comp sci major from Carnegie Mellon, and then Susan Koger, who was kind of the stylist, the merchant, in the business, in a women's fashion business. And the two of them were the co-founders, and they took venture capital and moved from Pittsburgh to San Francisco and was part of that whole Web 2.0 craze with a bunch of other brands that we can talk about. And so when they decided they wanted to bring in an outside CEO with more kind of retail scale experience, I had already gotten to know the founders because I had gotten to know everybody in e-commerce because I spent, 8 years trying to learn from anybody I could who was innovating in the space to bring it back to the urban brands. And they reached out to me and said, we're looking for a new CEO, and your name came up because they already knew me. So I flew out to San Francisco on a Friday night, meet with the VC, have dinner, spent 6 hours on Saturday with the two founders, husband and wife, kind of just like aligning on like, what's this going to look like? And then they said, yeah, like we want you to do it. So we put a deal together, and then I started in January 15.
Fantastic.
But the one thing that I insisted on was I said, Susan, I'm not going to do this without you. She was the co-founder, chief creative officer. Her husband was the CEO. And I said, I'll slide into Eric's spot. I said, but what's the women's fashion business? I'm not the customer. And you're the culture bearer here. So she had a permanent board seat. She was also the chief creative officer. So I said, you'll report to me on the operating side, and I'll report to you on the governance side. And that will be how we do this. So we'll hold each other accountable. And when I'm getting too far afield from like what you and the investors and the board, is thinking about as far as, the next phase, the next leg of growth and innovation and evolution. But from a day-to-day perspective, you're on my team, and there's a way of doing things that I'm going to bring with me from 8 years at Urban that you're going to have to trust me. And we were able to move incredibly quickly. It was a seamless transition with Eric. We flew around the country to the 3 offices, San Francisco, LA, and Pittsburgh. And I don't know why, but what was intuitive to me was I would get up and I spent 20 minutes celebrating Eric. Because I had just spent, a decade with Jake and Donna and Dick and Meg. And I'm like, Susan, Eric, like what you guys created is incredible. And there's so many people who like need this brand. And I remember the look on their faces, like they weren't expecting that at all. They were expecting me to come in and make it about me. And it's like, no, like I'm joining you guys, right? Like I want to be part of this. And my assessment, the same way that before Burton, there was a lot of this, but there was no this. ModCloth was the world I want my daughter to grow up in. The optimism, the joy, the inclusivity, the women of all shapes and sizes and demographics and backgrounds, having fun shopping together and not thinking about it, right? And so that was for me why I selected them. And they selected me because of my operating experience, my background, my personality, my leadership qualities, all those things that they wanted in, and having worked in an environment with a professional CEO and a founder. And so that transition was super seamless and went really well. And the results year one were incredible. And I thought I was going to be there for a decade. And I really had a big vision for what we were going to build there. And but the cost, role, company, location, right? It was inverted now. I wanted to run a brand. I was ready. I felt like it was my turn. And I wanted to prove to myself. So roll was what I was optimizing for. And and obviously like the brand you run matters. So that was kind of like there were other opportunities that I had explored, but I had to be flexible on location. So, you know, to my wife, hey, like we got 3 little ones at home. What do you think about pulling up stakes and moving across the country? Right? I mean, that was a huge sacrifice for her, and it had an impact on the family, and so there's a cost of those things. But but we made a go of it, and incredible people, incredible lifestyle out there. But for the business, I just felt like okay, like I was meant to do this, and this was a culmination of everything I'd done in the past at once, because there was not only the piece around, how do we reposition this brand that had kind of confused itself in the market? Is it plus? Is it not? Is it a pure play e-tailer? Is there opportunity in other channels and offline? What's the aesthetic? Is it strictly this like quirky novel brand, or can we get into other aesthetics and other categories beyond the fit and flare dress that was kind of like well known for when I joined? But also, like, we operated a vertical warehouse logistics call center in Pittsburgh with hundreds of employees that was a mess. So I'm parachuting into Pittsburgh week 1, and I got my management consultant hat on, and the engineer in me is sitting there with the team, like diagnosing, like, how do we get, units per labor hour up? Because that's a huge impact on the bottom line. And at the same time, I'm flying to LA to talk to the buying and the design team about, what we're going to do with the assortment and how we want to position the brand, and et cetera. So for me, that was like the first time where I was like hitting on all cylinders, getting like everything is alive, and I'm getting a chance to experience it all. But yeah, that was that. I'm very fortunate that they thought of me and reached out, and that I had that opportunity, and that I have a family that supported the move out west, and so a lot of people went into supporting that decision.
This might be the perfect moment just to segue off to have a few minutes on brand. There's a lot of people out there confused about brand. Mm-hmm. And with the emphasis, particularly in recent years, on tactical marketing, I think there's a tendency to confuse marketing and brand. Mm-hmm. Very different things. And I'd love you, with the benefit of all your experience, at this point in the conversation, just unpack that a little bit for us.
Your brand is defined by what your customers say about you when you're not in the room.
That's a great description.
I think we talk to ourselves a lot in this industry, in the 4 walls or amongst ourselves, and, the advertising industry in that complex, but then also how saturated we are with, new media, all media, and how bankrupt a lot of the words have become that we have used and used to use with very specific, precise meaning. But ultimately, I find that we try to make it way too complex, and that the best ideas are always the simplest ones. And you and I having a conversation about why we love Patagonia is what defines Patagonia, right? The conversation women had about ModCloth before I got there defined the brand of ModCloth, right? So is it a feeling? Is it a narrative, a story? Is it, like, whatever words you want to use. It comes down to like answering really simple questions, like, why do we exist? Who cares about what we're doing? Would anybody care if we went away?
That's a good one.
Right? And just like have a real honest conversation, and then validating all of it by understanding, what the conversation is that isn't like your customer talking to you in response to some brand campaign does not define your brand. They're responding to some stimulus you gave them. right? It's how people talk about when you as a brand is not in the room is what defines your brand, right? It's a it's a perception, whether it's true or not, right? So listening is a huge component, but also who you're listening to. So to me, it always starts with customer, even before brand, and really understanding like what customer am I serving? And in my hindsight, you know, retail, very price point driven, right? Like tiers. And there's a luxury customer, and there's a mass customer, and then there's this like big wide in between that we can call specialty or premium or whatever. And I've kind of generally stayed within that space, but I've kind of fluctuated a little bit. Um, but if you don't have a really clear view of who's the customer that you're serving, which is to say, who are we not serving, right? Like a great story from Anthropologie was when Wall Street would ask Glenn why Anthro doesn't sell men's or kids like Banana and J. Crew. And I don't know if he ever communicated this externally, but internally he's like, they don't get what we're doing, right? Like she doesn't want to be reminded of her obligations when she's shopping inside of an Anthropologie. Right? Like just like that right there, you either get that or you don't. And if you get it, every conversation after that, right? You're not even, you wouldn't think twice about like, "Oh, but maybe we should do men's,"
100%.
right? Because,
So clarifying.
you know, so it came from years of he and the team and, Dick and the Urban Inc. team mining that opportunity with that customer and knowing that customer so intimately. Why is Urban men's and women's? Well, like, what do 18 to 24-year-olds want to do?
Yeah.
They want to see and be seen,
Right.
right?
And to your point, don't overcomplicate it.
Like, live in the real world.
Yeah.
I remember when I was at ModCloth, we flew to Texas for a friend's event, and we were in church on a Sunday, and I'm looking around because I couldn't believe how many fit and flare dresses were in the pews, and Teresa's like elbowing me like would you stop gawking at all the women?
It's professional, darling.
I'm like we got to open a store down here.
Yeah.
But like you're just looking for the customer, right? And so I'll give you a couple other examples. So at Burton, they would sponsor riders, and the riders would get first crack at the new products that they're going to introduce, hard goods and soft lines. And if and the riders, these teenagers are like, I'm not wearing Big B head to toe, like that, like that's not cool. I'm not doing that. So why did Burton have all these sub brands, Ronin and AK and Red and Anon and whatever? Because the riders are like, I'm not wearing Big B head to toe. Very clarifying, right? We're repping for the rider, right? We are growing the sport. That's what we're doing here. Now you still got to deliver, right? And there's still tent poles. I got to ModCloth, and I mentioned that, I was down in LA with the merchandising design buying teams, and we were like 60% dresses when I first got there. And I knew from my time at Urban that the broader market was like 15-20% dresses, right? And I also knew that we were kind of at the tail end of a dress cycle in that moment, 2015, and we were peak like denim cycle, and athleisure was the new
On the way.
mega trend, right? So you pay attention to the market, you kind of see where the tailwinds are, where the consumption is going. You can see it in the data. So I'm armed with a predisposition as to what the opportunity is. But so I sit down, I'm with the team, and I'm trying to talk about, like, I'm just asking questions to learn, but also challenging the line plan, like how should we think about, growing the business outside of dresses. We're known for dresses. Our new customers come in by buying dresses. Like we had to grow the dress business. That was the pushback. And it was there was a couple men in the room, but it was mostly, maybe like 18 women in the room, me and 2 other men. And then it just hits me, and I say to everybody stand up. So I stand up, they all stand up. I'm like, anybody wearing a dress? And they all look around. You could just see it on their face, like
rolling eyes.
You asshole. And then it was like, I'm like, can we just test? Can we just try something? So we went to one of our vendors and we said, same fabric position, give us a separate, like a real simple blouse and skirt. And then the total retail for the 2 items is the same as one dress.
That's a fair test.
Right? Like we're not going to same budget for the outfit. 50% comp, like week 1. It just, the customer was begging for a different silhouette, a different classification, a different occasion. And then performance driven, proofs in the numbers. And then the team was like, okay, we have ideas. And then we're off and running. And then off of that, we all agreed that we were grossly over assorted in dresses. And so, quick Pareto analysis, and 90% of our revenue was in 30% of the styles, right? Because as an e-tailer, if you don't catch it in the first week that it launches, it gets buried in the catalog, right? So we take out half the SKUs over a 2-month period, just kind of like let things stock out, and then take them off the site and don't replace them, and no impact on demand. So we were able to use that volume in less styles to then launch our own label. And so then we kind of build out the design studio, hire a creative director, and a supporting team, and we're off and running. And within 2 years, we went from private label being like 2% of the business to 50% of the business in units sold. Which, like I mentioned that because that's really hard to do.
It's really hard to do.
Yeah. But it was because we already had, a customer who loved us, who's begging for more, and we just weren't listening. So, but with respect to brand, the customer wasn't coming to us because they were like, ModCloth is a great dress brand.
That was the miss, wasn't it? That was the assumption.
The assumption was we're a plus size brand for dresses for our customer, and they rely on us for that. But then I looked at the numbers, and 75% of our orders were reg size. So I'm like, we have a non-plus size customer, 3 to 1, in fact. So once I pulled back with the team, it was like, the brand trusts us because we are making them feel included. Or the customer trusts the brand because we're making them feel included. And that's where I came up with our new tagline, is that like ModCloth is pioneering inclusive fashion. They weren't using that language then, right? Plus was that moment was, the debate is plus, what's the connotation, is it off-putting or not to certain customers? Should you include it in your go-to-market? And I was just like, no, like we're building an inclusive fashion brand that makes women of all shapes and sizes feel comfortable shopping alone or together. And so then that just, once we got that clarity, and once everybody was kind of on board with it, then again, every conversation after that got simpler. Because you knew what you were doing, but also what you weren't doing. When I got to Lucky, there was a lot of brand confusion.
And Lucky, just for context, Lucky is after ModCloth. So we'll jump back to the exit of ModCloth.
Yeah,
but with the example from Lucky.
So we, after ModCloth was sold to Walmart and I stayed there for a year, I left. And then once my year non-compete lapsed, I went to Lucky Brand, which was, a legacy 90s denim brand known for like Americana, rock and roll, based in the Arts District in LA, which is, super cool and inspiring. And the brand had a few iterations, had traded a few times, had a few iterations of management. And it was a pretty big business with a ton of brand awareness, but I'd say brand confusion. And if you asked a dozen people what they thought of Lucky Brand, you'd get a dozen different answers. So when I got there, the first thing I did was I told the team, let's get the landing page and catalog cover of our last 12 campaigns, monthly campaigns. And let's get our best sellers and our biggest buys for the last 12 drops. And we just put it up on the walls in the boardroom, right? And then I asked the leadership team, invite 3 or 4 people within your departments that you feel has a handle on who the customer is. And then we spent 3 days just talking about the customer. And this campaign was for a Gen Z kid. And this campaign was for a millennial person. And this one was for the boomers, right? And then you look at the assortment and it's like, okay, we have Rolling Stones and we have Nirvana and we have Lumineers in our graphic tees.
That's quite a spread.
That's quite a range, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's not the same customer.
No. No.
Right. So and all this, just keep it hey, we all went to concerts when we were younger, and this is this is a nostalgia brand. But who are we speaking to? Because the nostalgia is all over the board.
Yeah. Who's our priority?
And when I looked at the numbers, and this is billion gross shipments, right? So a pretty sizable independent company. Half men's, half women's. Half fashion, half denim. Half direct to consumer, half wholesale. Half full price, half off price. I mean, it literally was everything's a good idea.
Yeah. Pick a lane.
Grow top line. And I'm not being disparaging to the team, and who knows what the mandate was, and what the market was at the time. But when I got there, my training and my worldview was, before we get into these adjacent categories and businesses and customers, we have to crush it with one core customer, and we have to define who that is. And so after a few months, we got really locked in, and everybody's really excited about this. What do they call them? Exennial.
I haven't heard that term.
Older millennial and Gen Z.
Okay.
Right. And for me, and always for me, what am I bringing? What am I contributing as one of the brand stewards? And I didn't see the word lucky as a casino, getting lucky, right? Or in this Americana rock and roll, lucky to be alive. I viewed the word lucky as gratitude. I feel lucky. I feel fortunate to be able to spend $100 on a pair of jeans and not think about it. And what I discovered was the team at Lucky had done this incredible work that nobody knew about on the back end, taking excess fabric and returns that were unsellable and sharing it with agencies that were working with the homeless population in downtown LA.
Oh, wow.
Not just extra clothes, but materials to insulate walls. And I mean, really incredible stuff. To the order of magnitude of what Bombas does, or what Tom's was known for before they sold to Bain. And I'm sure they kept doing it, but like
Yeah.
when the founder was still there. And so for me, it was like, okay, like there's this really clear message, story that we need to just tell more people, right? And people like me that want to give back and say, hey, like if I can spend $100 for a pair of great jeans that I know is going to help folks that aren't as fortunate as I am, that's going to be the position of Lucky Brand in the market. And then when you like, you know, turn the Rubik's Cube and peel the layers back, and it's like, okay, most of the denim brands in that price tier of 100 to 150, maybe 200 at the high end, are these European brands that are very serious and don't have a personality. So we could also play on the fact that we're an American business and American made and that, you know, heritage and nostalgia. You know, and so like we start, but that's when the team, like once you simplify it and define the core, then the team starts adding to it. And all the creativity starts kicking in of like, this is what we could do. And this is like, and then we started talking about like, what's the music inspiration, right? And you know, like Red Hot Chili Peppers is like, oh my God, like our customer, like that was one of their favorite brands, and they're an LA brand, and you know, right, and like then you're just like off to the races, and that was September of 19 to March of 2020, and then just as we're about to go execute,
The world.
the world shuts down.
Yeah.
But you know, but like so that was like missed the opportunity to bring that to life in the market. Mandate changed instantly with the COVID lockdowns, where it was, you know, stay alive, get to the other side. But um, but you know, just kind of the conversation around brand, and you have places like Burton and the urban brands that have such a clear internal understanding of who the customer is and how they want their brand discussed amongst their customers. And then opportunity like ModCloth, where there's a real strong conviction internally. It just you need somebody to translate that to the market.
They hadn't quite articulated it as tightly as they might.
And then they hadn't put the business model around delivering on that promise, right? I mean, brands have a position defined by how the customer talks about you when you're not in the room. You inherently are making a promise in how you communicate the brand. Walmart. Okay, so I spent a year at Walmart.
I actually wanted to ask you about that year at Walmart.
I had no.
So actually, for context, so ModCloth was sold, and it was sold to Jet.com, which is a division of Walmart.
Which had just been bought by Walmart.
Got it.
So we were bought by Walmart through the Jet
Through Jet.
subsidiary.
Yeah.
And my first trip to Bentonville, I get the
headquarters of Walmart.
The headquarters of Walmart. I get the founder's book, the biography. I don't think it was a biography as much as it was a memoir.
Sam Walton.
Sam Walton. So I'm reading that the day before and the trip down the plane in the hotel room before the first meeting. And then I arrive, and the founder's fingerprints are everywhere.
Really? That obvious?
I mean, it was so obvious to me. And you read Sam's book, obviously he's since deceased, but the family still controls the company. And he wanted to bring a middle-class lifestyle to rural America. That's why Walmart exists. Okay, how we do that changes with the times and with scale and with personnel, but you know, like, why are we here? We're here to make the lives of rural Americans, and maybe broaden that definition to people that don't have the same means as others, to have a middle-class lifestyle, to have access, right? And so kind of putting those lenses on before showing up, you know, looking for the signal from the noise of everything. I was like, okay, like, it's clear to me what they're doing. And they love their brand. They're so proud of what they're able to deliver on the founder's promise still today, decades after he's long and gone.
That's extraordinary.
You know, and so but then as one of like half a dozen brands that were bought up in that time period, and they had, you know, the leaders of those brands meet with their internal comms and PR team. We're sitting around and they're asking us questions, and, you know, direct, straightforward, honest Matt can't help himself. And I say to their PR team, I'm like, you guys are terrible at telling your story. I'm like, what I've experienced here the last 3 days completely changes how I think about your brand. Yeah. But I've never shopped in a Walmart. I don't live with folks that do. We never talk about Walmart. And the only thing I know about it is the nasty stuff that, you know, people perpetuate online. I'm like, you guys need to tell everybody, one, how proud you are of your brand, and two, all the accomplishments that give you that sense of pride. And so I'm certainly not like drawing a direct line between one conversation and today, but I'm sure that was like on their mind. And you look at what their brand marketing has been the last 5 years, they've done an incredible job at telling their story and getting folks to know why they're proud of Walmart. And now you see that they're one of the most, you know, highest affinity top 10 brands of Gen Z, because the Gen Z generation wasn't burdened by, you know, the past. And so, but again, it goes back to like what's the promise we're making? And you can measure that, right? Like you can measure, like, are we meeting that promise? Sometimes you are, and you're not getting credit for it. Sometimes you're not, but perception persists. So I think like really understanding who your customer is and what you're doing for them. Listening to that customer. Like really listening to and living, you know, with them, among them, and making it intuitive to understand what their perception is of you. And then asking yourself, what are we doing here? Why is this important? Would anybody care? And then asking yourself, what is the promise that we're making, either explicitly in our marketing or implicitly in, you know, kind of how we show up in the customer experiences we create, and are we meeting that promise? Like, to me, like that's the top of the pyramid. And if you can figure that out, then you can start to like branch out into, you know, some of the aspects of brand management and brand marketing and some of the, you know, other things that kind of impact the way that you think about, you know, does this investment, you know, is it accretive or dilutive to our brand position and the brand equity that we have? But I find that like that starting point in the top of the pyramid is so critical to everything else that follows. And I've tried to bring that with me and so I go to Goodwill, which, not kind of jumping ahead too much, but
no, I'm glad, because I wanted to segue that.
But on the brand side, I mean, everybody loves Goodwill. It's a love brand.
Tell me what you mean by love brand. I've heard you use that term. I think it'd be great to unpack for the audience.
Yeah, again, going back to what do people say about your brand when you're not there? Like, Josh, do you ever go to Goodwill? Oh, I love Goodwill, right? What's the first response? Like, I love that brand. Anthropologie was a love brand. It still may be today. I just don't pay attention to it like I did. But like, you know, you'd ask people like, do you shop at Anthropologie? Oh, I love Anthropologie. Funny enough, my wife's the Anthro customer, so that was my kind of like connection to the customer there. And half of my wife's friends loved Anthropologie, and half didn't understand it. I want to go as strong to say they hated it, but they thought it was expensive. And I'd ask them where they shop. They shopped at J. Crew and Banana Republic. Yeah. And it was like, okay, like, you know, for them shopping was linear. I want to go to the same section of the same planogram of the same store anywhere in the country when I know I'm going there because I need a blazer or a blouse, or I need, you know, I'm shopping for a vacation and I need to know where, you know, the swimsuits are, and I don't want to have to think, right? So there was a big like psychographic overlay with Anthropologie, you know, that I think even made that brand stronger with their core customer. But for me, there's very few love brands in the world where you say, like, oh, I love that brand. And then Goodwill to me was one of them. Because like once you got to know the brand, how could you not love this 100-year-old mission-driven business that um, helped communities in the way that they did?
Yeah, to serve those who most deserve the support.
But when I got there, what I didn't realize was how little people actually knew the mission of Goodwill, let alone what its role was in the circularity movement. So again, an opportunity for me to come in and say, okay, what are we doing? Why is it important? And then to match it with the moment in the market, and then all the data and research that I was able to get a hold of and look at was that in the secondhand digital market, Goodwill was nowhere. Like it literally didn't come up on the market maps, right? You had the peer-to-peer players, you had the managed marketplace players, you had like Facebook Marketplace and eBay and Amazon and the big players, and there was no mention of Goodwill. And it not only was a missed opportunity to kind of like, missed opportunity from a business perspective because the category is 50 billion and growing 7 times faster than total retail. So like, where's the growth market? That's a growth market.
Yes.
It was also a massive opportunity to miss introducing the brand to the next generation of shoppers and donators. And so that's what I kind of brought with me to that opportunity. And before getting into the conversation about that experience, I'll just say from a brand perspective, another opportunity where you had this like amazing love brand that everybody knew of and maybe had experienced at some point where it was like the place where I dropped off a donation. But people didn't really truly understand the depth of the story and the impact of what Goodwill means in the world to so many different communities. And so that was like kind of my most recent opportunity, to think about, what are ways to unlock the equity of a brand in a way that is both accretive to that brand, but also to the business that we're trying to accelerate.
Yes, and I think for me, so Goodwill Finds was it was proposed to be, and you launched and developed it, the online presence that was fed effectively by the Goodwill operators around the country.
Right.
Is that sort of a rough? In fact, I should ask you to describe it. You do a better job than me. How would you describe Goodwill Finds, or what the customer problem that Goodwill Finds was designed to solve?
We were building a direct competitor to ThredUp and RealReal for the local Goodwill charities. So the Goodwill charities are 150 independent charities across the country. So there's no corporation, no shared services, no franchise model. Like it's an affiliation based on sharing a brand and a mission, but they're completely autonomous operating units. And their go-to-market online had mostly been as third-party sellers through eBay, Amazon. Shop Goodwill is a reseller that is operated by one of the local Goodwills out west. But it's an auction site that was mostly serving resellers that would come onto the site, buy items low, and then flip it on their Poshmark store or on their Instagram store or their TikTok shop. And so Goodwill recognized that they were missing the opportunity going direct to consumer, but also that they were at risk in the future of losing mind share with consumers and donators as others were starting to come into the space. And then during the COVID lockdowns, when their stores were deemed non-essential, like most store operators in the US, that gave them kind of the catalyst for, we are too exposed to brick and mortar. We need to go faster with our online strategy. So that was the impetus for the venture. It was a Delaware company, separate 501c3 that was created and seed funded by half a dozen Goodwills across the country. And then they found me as the founding CEO. And I came in when it was a technology project with Salesforce, with some consultants and contractors kind of, standing it up. And so I came in and took over the project, launched a new company, hired the team, set up a new organization, built out all the workflows and systems, and at the same time, finished the product and the product launch, launched it to massive fanfare, and then was fixing the plane while we were trying to fly it. As demand just like grew like a weed, but we were launching with an MVP, and we're grossly underfunded for what we were trying to build and navigating. But man, like just again, a culmination of everything I'd done to date, with a consumer technology bent to it, but still, reselling fashion mostly. We also resold electronics and jewelry and other items, working with this incredible brand, that consumers in the US, knew and loved. And then, a lot of the, kind of, change management, leadership, challenges that come with, trying to do something bold and, with a big vision and working with constrained resources. So, that was really exciting to me, the challenge of it. And I was able to bring my own team together. So a lot of folks that had worked with me in the past signed up when I was like, hey, I'm doing this. I want you to do it with me. And they were like excited to join up, sign up, so to speak. Yeah, so it was a very unique opportunity. I wasn't looking to join the nonprofit sector, but I also got a chance to really like get deep in understanding circularity business models and kind of what's happening in the broader retail industry around sustainability, and really going deep with understanding the secondhand customer and why they love this category. And so, that for me was, that learning curve piece that I got to kind of add versus things I had done in the past that I was bringing to the opportunity.
Yes. So let's quickly touch on just the not-for-profit versus, edgy for-profit kind of cultures, and if you've got any sort of insights or lessons that you think would be really helpful for others who are interested in, doing well by doing good, more broadly speaking, that may be coming from a not-for-profit background and considering how they might scale it with the benefit of for-profit thinking systems and process. I'd love to chat about that first.
Well, for me, it was kind of a fun full circle moment of early 20s.
Yeah.
First business commercial experience was co-founding a not-for-profit, and trying my hat on as a social entrepreneur, and then 25 years later, getting presented this opportunity. So that was kind of a fun full circle moment. I would say the kind of the assets and liabilities. On the one side, we had relative access to 5 billion pounds a year of donations that flow into the local Goodwills, right? So, and marketplaces are all about who has access to high quality supply at a reasonable cost of goods. So, that was a huge advantage. We also had the advantage of this great brand that everybody knew and loved, albeit it was an older demographic, and there was a lot of confusion as to what the actual impact and mission and business model was today. But that was asset. And then the third was, and I give the founding Goodwill organizations credit for this. They set this up as an independent company. So it was a true startup, no safety net, no balance sheet to leverage. I mean, we were on the ledge the whole time, but that allowed me the autonomy and the ability to iterate and move fast and build a team that was strictly focused on, survival, on meeting our milestones, on serving our customer, Goodwill Finds, and building the product, building the platform. And so those were assets. More than a few liabilities that came with the governance structure. And I understand why they did it, because they were building it for, the primarily for the use of the charities. Um, they didn't want to share their brand with, a third party for-profit investor by bringing in outside capital. Um, and I think that they also thought that there would be a more receptive audience amongst foundations and other, call it impact investors, once we got kind of to the point where we needed growth capital. But we were on 90 days of working capital or less for 2.5 straight years. I mean, so
That's not stressful at all.
I mean, yeah. So there was that just keeps you focused. That drives clarity on what's important. Um, and so that was actually freeing in a way, because you didn't have the time or the bandwidth to spend on things that weren't mission critical. And so proud of the team. I mean, we crushed it. Like, the numbers on the demand side, the units sold, how quickly we iterated. I mean, the opportunity that we were able to take advantage of once OpenAI went commercial, and we built a chat bot with like 3 people on our engineering team that within 3 months of launch was handling 70% of our inbound contacts. Um, so so proud of the team, the products that we delivered, the platform that we were building. Um, but inherently, nonprofits are there to serve the public, and the stated mission that was filed with the IRS. And there's certain constraints around that with respect to ancillary revenue, around how you deploy capital, around filing expenses in certain categories. And we got to the point where it was obvious that we were going to be hand to mouth for years. And for us to actually take a shot at it, we needed 25 million in working capital and growth capital to get to enough scale for break even. And that just was not like in the calculus for how they were thinking and operating. So we came to the hard decision to merge it with another platform that they were operating, and to consolidate it into one digital go-to-market. But that's not like, you don't hire me to do that, right? And so so that was a bummer, right? And as an operator, it's a failure. You're either winning or you're learning. And I like to say that the greatest athletes, performers, founders, operators in business, they just get a lot of shots on goal. It's volume. It's just like, keep going, whether it's for one thing or a series of things. And so always feeling like I have to start with, what's my accountability in this? I wasn't successful in convincing them to give us $25 million. Full stop, right? So the accountability is with me. And the reason why we weren't able to scale it and we moved on is because we ran out of money. But we accomplished so much in that period of time. I think they learned a lot as far as their business model, their opportunity in the market. We generated 2 billion unique visitors to our site with no marketing budget in a couple of years. So I mean, we had a massive impact, I think, in the market. Like, I think the market's talking about Goodwill today in a way that they weren't 3 years ago.
This is clearly a growth market. I think I don't think we've totally figured it out yet. And I'd love to get your insights in terms of, starting with a blank sheet of paper. What would you share in terms of the lessons you've learned that we want to double down on going forward, the things we're still kind of figuring out, and any sort of pitfalls to avoid?
We didn't talk about it much, but the year I spent at Walmart under Mark Lurie's leadership, he would always refer to the inputs and the outputs and focus on the inputs, and which I loved. And so I reference this a lot. I think if you look at the inputs on what's happening in the secondhand market narrowly, but circularity more broadly, it's a congruence of events, like a moment in time, that the why now question has been answered. Gen Z has taken the stigma off of secondhand. Like, I remember 10 years ago, right? If somebody went into, that category, right? people would look down on it. But this generation and alpha and every generation after is going to have a completely different perception in secondhand, in part because they know it's more sustainable. But there's also, certain primal forces that have been at play in the consumer market that, goes back thousands of years. And one of them is younger consumers have time and no money, and older consumers have money and no time, right? And the younger consumers are always looking for value. And, I try to be a little bit of a student of the history of the industry that we operate in. And, it's not hard to think back to the innovations in the value channel where it was like, dollar stores, and then it was outlet centers, right? And then it was, Groupon and Gilt Group, right? And then it was the fast fashion players, blowing out their mall stores with the fast turns. And then it was Shein and Temu with the manufacturer direct to consumer. And so, that part of the market is always looking for the latest innovation for value. So when you put together the sustainability piece with that market always looking for the latest innovation and value, which this clearly is, you couple those two things with the fact that we're living in this, attention seeking world, this social media driven engagement world where you're constantly posting images of yourself. So the unconscious need to have a different wardrobe or show your personal style or not look like everybody else or not wear the same thing twice online in different situations is now standard. And the technology, the cost of compute with the dawn of agentic AI in this moment is solving the profitability challenge. All four of those things are happening right now. And so going back to the previous comments about the founders having this conviction about the future, I have incredible conviction that 10 years from now, the same way that you check out on Amazon and you buy a new book and they give you the same UPC label option used at a cheaper price, that's going to be everywhere. You're going to check out on Target and you're buying a pair of Nikes and they're going to have, whether it's their own inventory or it's a third-party catalog that's piping into that environment. And I'm being like way literal in my illustrations.
Sure.
Who knows what the innovators are going to create in the future that none of us are thinking about today. But merchants aren't going to want to lose their customer to somebody else. So they're going to always meet the moment. And they're going to say, hey, like you can get this secondhand pair of Nikes, that either are the same style or a similar style for half price. Because we want to serve the customer and we want to keep you within our environment. And brands are going to say the same thing where, Patagonia's kind of pioneered this a little bit, but they're going to more and more shelf space, floor space, more and more real estate on the website and the digital experiences and et cetera, is going to be their secondhand offer where they're going to recapture that market and they're going to want to sell vintage, their brand and their label. And it's just going to become another on-ramp for a certain customer profile or segment within their target market to participate in the brand. So the same way that, somebody might say, why do you have a huge clearance sales section on your website with all your new offerings? Well, because some customers want to buy the newest stuff because they're not price sensitive. And other customers want to participate in the brand, and the only way they can is through clearance.
What would you recommend leaders in the industry and those who aspire to be should be thinking about in order to bring that future reality forward?
My observation in the market right now is that there are a lot of different business models trying to find scale. And you have managed marketplaces like ThreadUp and RealReal that take possession of the goods and resell it on consignment. You have peer-to-peer, an Etsy and a Depop and a Poshmark and um, eBay to an extent, where it's a storefront and you're building your own audience and buyers become sellers and sellers become buyers and but it's mostly just like the platform and allowing the market to kind of find its center and managing liquidity. You have these SaaS or RaaS, resale as a service players, Trove and what ThreadUp's trying to do with their software extension. It's trying to enable brands who want to control the experience. And then you have brick and mortar brands that are saying bring it back in for store credit. Then you have players that are saying we're gonna open up these storefronts, these Amazon, like we'll buy the container of Amazon unsold and then we'll open up a store, or brick and mortar players like a Savers or a Goodwill that's trying to become multi-channel in their go-to-market. Right? I mean, like that's a lot of different experimentation and innovation that's occurring. And I just go back to how does a customer want to shop? And historically, the customer likes to shop where other customers are. Right? Like why does your favorite restaurant in a section of town with other restaurants? Why did Americans for decades drive to the mall where there's all these stores in one place? So I don't think it's winner take all. I think there's multiple models, but as an industry, we tend to be a little bit careful or precious with the adjacencies or how we intermingle our brands with other brands or localities, and I don't think that scales. And so I think the question of profitability in the industry is being compounded by how brands are not committing to a path. And so they're opening up their own, brand.resale.com. Or they have it as like a buy, sell, trade section of their store. Or they are like playing around with, like as a excess resale channel on one of these, big marketplaces. And the reality is that you either need to fully embrace it in your go-to-market as a brand, or you need to be where all the other brands doing resale are, because that's where all the customers are at, because customers want convenience and they want price and they want speed. And so, when at Goodwill, I was envisioning building the platform for the resale industry to resell all their returns. GoodwillFinds.com / your brand name, where we would intermingle all the donations of your branded goods that were coming to Goodwills across the country with your returns in one branded shop. Now, that can happen on multiple marketplaces. Maybe one of the other players will do it or is doing it. But I think there has to be some consolidation of supply to make it easier for customers to make it more of a habit. And you've seen people with trepidation go on and off Amazon, Nike most famously. But Amazon has everything they need to win. They drop a garment bag on the porch or in the mailbox of 160 different Amazon Prime homes in America and say, fill it up, here's a free return postage label. We'll process it, we'll resell it for you, and whatever credit gets created from the resale, we'll put into your Prime account. It's game over, right? I don't know that they're going to do that because they have to be careful with competing with their sellers. But someone's going to do it. And then I think that's the tipping point where the demand getting concentrated enough that then there's enough volume that you can start to make the investments on the technology side to make it more efficient, to achieve profitability, and then we're off.
Yeah, that's great. Matt, in closing, you have done so much. You've come so far. You have continued to challenge yourself, and you do have that polymath's the perfect description. What's next? Like what mountain do you want to climb next?
I try. I'm at the point in my life where I try to be present more than not. I love this expression that the past is a memory and the future is your imagination. And the only thing that's real is this moment right now. So I honestly don't give that much thought to managing what's next. My process is that, after kind of catching my breath, which I'm doing right now, I reach out to the people that I know or people that I see are doing things that inspire me. And I ask them, can I have a conversation with you? Can I come sit and learn from you? Is there anything I can do to help you? And I do that for a while. And the inspiration spark happens, or the light bulb goes off, or an opportunity finds me.
The magnet works.
And so I try to turn the magnet back on, and kind of see where it leads. But also, I'm okay, kind of being in between, being comfortable with how uncomfortable it can be when you're transitioning between one thing to the next, and, taking advantage of that time to, work on personal projects, exercise a little bit more than usual, spend time with my family, and so, that's the moment right now. And ultimately for me, I know that the bar for what's next is going to be, who am I doing it with? What's the purpose of the brand that I'm getting involved with that I can make a personal connection to? And is there a moment in time for this business, for this industry, that things that I've done to date can be additive and can help them achieve some bold vision of the future or some mandate? And, that can come in a lot of different ways and a lot of different roles. It might even lead to some different geographies than where I'm at today. But, for me, I trust that when you put it out in the universe, it comes back to you.
That is a great framework. Thank you so much for your time. You've been incredibly generous. That was a masterclass in retail. I think it's going to help a lot of people in terms of the way they're thinking about their brands and scaling their business. So thank you so much, mate.
My pleasure. So good to see you. Thanks
It was great to see you.
Thanks for the invite.
That was killer. That was killer. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There was actually multiple points there where I felt like we could have kept going for another half hour.
Yeah.
Because it was super triggering in a positive way for me. I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea. And I kind of wanted to dive down the rabbit hole further. And I kept having to stop myself because I'm conscious that, we had a lot to get through. You've done a lot of amazing stuff. So
it's been a wild ride.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride.
And I say that because I haven't seen you in so long.
Yeah.
And when I really reflect on when we were in proximity last, and like we've over the years, kind of been aware of each other and sending, well wishes and all that.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you're as different of a person today than then as I feel like I am. But your essence is who you are.
Yes.
And so the fact that you and I were just like, hey, good to see you.
Great to see you.
Yeah.
Let's talk for 2 hours.
What was the last thing we were talking about 14
exactly.
years ago?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, that's that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a special thing.
Yeah.